Now, Andrew, I've just noticed on Scott Morrison's Facebook page, his statement, he says, I'm just reading this to you as I've noted it on Facebook a moment ago. I note the Solicitor-General's advice released publicly today regarding the matter of appointments to administer departments while I served as Prime Minister. I note that the Solicitor-General found that the appointments were valid and that while there is some historical precedent for the publication in the Gazette of appointments to administer particular departments of state under Section 64, there is no consistent practice in that regard. To respond to the Solicitor-General's advice, I refer to my statement last week where I set out that at no time, other than the consideration of the PEP 11 matter from first principles, did I exercise powers established under these lawful authorities. This means that I did not fulfil the function of an acting or co-minister, as has been alleged. Ministers continued to exercise their full authorities without any interference with my full trust and confidence. The authorities at issue were put in place as an emergency power to be used only in extreme circumstances due to incapacity or in the national interest. These authorities were only sought with respect to where ministers could act unilaterally without reference to or interference by Cabinet or the Prime Minister. The suggestion that ministers could be instructed or directed on these matters is false. Given the serious crises facing Australia, I considered it prudent to put these authorities in place should they be necessary as a safeguard. The authorities granted were respected in the fact that they were not exercised, as the circumstances for which they were provided did not materialise. In short, the authorities were not misused. From January 2020 to the time of the election, the government I led dealt with multiple crises. During that time, thousands of decisions were made, some precautionary, some active. My focus was on saving lives, livelihoods and protecting Australians in one of the most challenging periods we had known since the Second World War. In the extraordinary circumstances I was contending with, decisions were made and then I kept moving forward. We did not dwell on such decisions. He goes on to say, notwithstanding the current criticisms of these past decisions, it's important not to lose sight of the result that was achieved. And he talks about various successes. And then he says, in summary, the authorities established were valid. Number two, there was no consistent process for publication of such authorities. Three, no powers were exercised under these authorities except in the case of the PEP 11 decision or misused. Four, ministers exercised their portfolio authorities fully with my utmost confidence. Five, as Prime Minister, I did not act as Minister. Six, on the PEP 11 matter, this was done lawfully from first principles. And seven, Australia's performance through the pandemic was one of the strongest in the developed world. Andrew Clennell, the former Prime Minister, remains unrepentant.
Well, he hasn't got an excuse, has he? He hasn't got an answer back to the Solicitor-General's advice. It's the same message he was saying at the press conference last week, sadly for Scott Morrison. You can't even find anyone hardly on his side who thinks he acted in a justifiable manner. He didn't even tell his own Treasurer or Finance Minister that he was doing it. Why was he doing it? He still doesn't explain it. Why was he doing it in 2021 when the crisis was in 2020 with Home Affairs and Treasury? I mean, at least he's got a fair point with the spirited defence of his policy actions, etc. But I'm afraid on this one, Kieran, he was asked for an apology, obviously, by Anthony Albanese. I think he'd be better off just saying I stuffed up.
Yeah, well, he certainly hasn't done that. And as for trying to rectify this for future episodes, that was something that former, he's very much the current Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was addressing today as well, Andrew.
Yeah, I just want to dwell on that statement for a second, Kieran. I just don't see what's wrong with saying, look, and he said this halfway last week, Scott Morrison, in hindsight, they were unnecessary. How about, in hindsight, I wish I'd never done it, or in hindsight, I wish I'd told the people about it and my colleagues. Simple as that. Anyway, look, it looks like Anthony Albanese will legislate, so it'll never happen again. It's difficult to get these politicians to say sorry sometimes. Here was Kieran asking the PM about possible legislation earlier.
Prime Minister, with that gazetting of changes in the ministerial setup, is that going to mandate that now? Is that going to be, required upon this government and future governments to basically remove the secrecy of any changes that might be made?
Well, I've directed my department to work with the Office of the Governor-General to achieve that outcome. But I think one of the things that we will need to consider is any future legislative change to make sure that that's enshrined, to make sure that it's not dependent upon the goodwill of the government of the day. I think it's fair to say that what we're dealing with here wasn't envisaged.
So another inquiry, you've got the likely legislation to make it explicit that any change in ministerial responsibilities has to be made public. And then the other parliamentary response that we suspect will at least be attempted in the parliament is a censure.
I think you'll see it for sure, and I think it'll pass. I mean, look at the Labor numbers and the crossbench. It just means it condemns Scott Morrison. It's just embarrassing, and it's just a distraction they don't need for the opposition. I mean, Scott Morrison there talking about he needed the emergency powers for the COVID pandemic. What's the PEP 11 decision got to do with the COVID pandemic? Here's the Prime Minister. He doesn't want to spell out his tactics, but it's pretty obvious to us all, talking about the censure earlier.
Well, various people have expressed views. Karen Andrews has said that Mr Morrison should resign from Parliament. That, in my view, is a matter for Mr Morrison and his colleagues. Quite clearly, I think that Mr Morrison's behaviour was extraordinary, undermined our parliamentary democracy, and he does need to be held to account for it.
Susan Lee, Deputy Liberal Leader, understandably a bit uncomfortable earlier when asked about the prospect of a censure motion by Kieran.
The Greens are going to move a censure motion against Scott Morrison in the Parliament. Do you expect that to happen?
I don't know whether that will happen, and I don't know what the Greens are proposing. Most things that the Greens propose don't make any sense to me, but they also tie up a lot of wasted time.
Is it potentially a basis for a censure of Scott Morrison?
I don't think so.
I mean, the government does have to be careful here. The opposition's right about that, but as you put to Susan Lee, they're saying they can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can't keep doing press conferences about this, Anthony Albanese. They've got to get on with an inquiry and get the results, but get on with actual government. But I can see why they'd want to apply a censure motion, and there has to be in the back of the head, I think, some thinking from the Labor side, having been in government when they copped a number of royal commissions from Tony Abbott targeted at them. That has to be in the back of their minds on this one. Don't forget they didn't dig up this one. It was gifted to them. Simon Benson and Jeff Chambers in the book Plagued revealed this. Contemporaneous interviews, Scott Morrison says, however it happened, they revealed that. The authors have copped a bit of flack. I don't think they really deserved that flack. One of them, Jeff Chambers, revealed the Monday after they revealed it on the Saturday, for example, that he'd taken over Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources as well. Without those authors, we wouldn't even know about this, and perhaps we should be all grateful that they published the revelations.